session. So if you need to go back and view any of it, Kevin said we could put it up on our YouTube channel for a couple of weeks. I also have a program for Monday night that I still need to put up as well. So check out our YouTube channel, and you can replay all of Kevin's program on there. A few other announcements. We have a blood drive at the library tomorrow between noon and 5 o'clock. If you're in the area and want to donate, please stop by. Looks like we have quite a few appointments open. So that's tomorrow afternoon. And then we actually have a few spots in our intro to playing the ukulele. So if you've ever wanted to learn how to play the ukulele and you have a few nights free during the month of June, there's some specific nights you need to be able to come and attend the session. We'd love to have you. Like I said, we probably have like 4 or 5 spots still open in that series, and that starts tomorrow. Everything's on our website. If you have any questions, or stop by the library or call for more information. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin. He did ask that if you have any questions tonight, to go ahead and type them into the Q&A or chat. Toward the end of the program, I will go through those and read those to Kevin, and he will be happy to answer all those questions. And other than that, I think that's all I have for announcements. Kevin, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
All right. Thank you, Valerie, and the ELA Library for having me and allowing me to talk about the Columbian World's Fair. To me, it's a fascinating topic. If I had a time machine and I had 3 choices, I think this is one of the times I would set the time machine to go back in time. I just think it would be fascinating to visit this event going on in 1893, just because of so many things are happening. So let's jump right into it. I have 49 slides, and hopefully we'll get through it in a little less than an hour. Then we'll have some Q&A and some maybe discussion about the World's Fair and engineering feats. As she mentioned, I'm an engineer, and I also do architecture tours with the Chicago Architecture Center. So I would say it is biased towards the architecture and engineering, but there are a few other things I've sprinkled in here I think that you hopefully will find interesting. So we'll be looking at the history leading up to the World's Fair, and I hope to scratch the surface of the construction, engineering, and competition of the World's Fair. I think you'll be amazed at this event, and literally that the city of Chicago designed and built basically a temporary city to house or hold 200,000 people per day would come and go on average to this venue. And I just thought that we have I think several of us know what has just some of the things that have gone on or that come from the World's Fair. To me, just some of the different things just going through to me is one of the zipper, or it was the flask locker, and also the automatic dishwasher, was introduced there in 1893. And also one thing I thought was very interesting, just the squat penny. I don't know if you've gone to those sites where you put your penny in and you roll it through there and it comes out with like a stamp on it. So you could do that there. So there's a list of other things that were available there. And as I said, the World's Columbian Exposition lasted 6 months, from May 1st, 1893 to October 30th, 1893. And during that time, it was 27 million visitors came to it, as I said, for just under 200,000 people on average a day. So in less than 2.5 years, as I said, the Chicago city built a temporary city for about 200,000. And to me, it's amazing that at the time, the population of Chicago was 1 million. So that would be like 20% of the city going to someplace like the lakefront every day. And the population of the United States was 65 million. So here, I think we need to go back a little history and background of just of these competitions or for the fairs. So here we have a map of the centennial grounds of the first official World's Fair that was held in the United States, and it was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, from May 10th to November 10th in 1876 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. And so this is really kind of puts the United States in this whole competition for a World's Fair. And you can see there's a couple of large buildings on a main square, and it covered. And here is that main building. So you can see this is building number 1, the main building, and it was disassembled and sold in 1881. And again, these buildings, this one was 464 feet wide and 1,880 feet long, covering about 21 football fields. No, I'm sorry, 21 acres, or how many football fields is that? Well, 1.3 acres, or about 16 football fields. So that in 1876, we're building buildings this big. So that was Philadelphia. Now we jump to London, England for the Great Exhibition of 1851. And in architecture, this is a big event. This is really quite the thing. It was housed in the Crystal Palace. And this too was a temporary structure built in Hyde Park, London. And this building was 1,851 feet long, 535 feet wide. And if you're paying attention, it was a little shorter, but much, much wider, and it was much higher. So this one would be able to put 17 football fields in it, and it was covered one more acre than what the Philadelphia building had. And basically, it was built on the largest glass pane you could make at the time, which was 49 inches by 10 inches. And so it was kind of the modulus of this Crystal Palace. And when we were in London, this is 2017, we were in Hyde Park, and there was a plaque there, I think I remember seeing, but this is the site of where the Crystal Palace was. So to me, it's just, again, that we would put on these major productions and they would just be temporary, which was just kind of blows my mind that we would spend all this money and then for 6 months celebrate and then take it all down. And way in the background, you see the Shard of Glass by Renzo Piano. And also very closely, very faintly next to that real pointed thing, there is the London Eye, or the largest Ferris wheel in Europe back there. I just thought that was pretty amazing. So now we go from London to Paris at the Universal Exposition in 1889 in Paris, France. And this too marks an anniversary. This marks the 100th anniversary of the storming of the Bastille. So here, the Eiffel Tower marks the entrance to the fair with the machine gallery, or their big building, kind of as you can see it in the background there at the other end of the axis of the fair. And at this fair, 32 million people attended it over its six-month run. And the Eiffel Tower was the tallest in the world until the Chrysler building beat it in 1930. And then that was surpassed by the Empire State Building. So here, like I say, we want to focus on the Eiffel Tower and that big building in the background, the machinery building. To me as an engineer, this is that building that was built in 1889. And to me, it's amazing that we would build this and then tear it down. If you look in the lower left corner, you can see 2 people sitting on a bench, just to get you a size or a scale of this building and just how big they were. Again, this one is a 1,708 feet long by 370 feet wide. And the arches are 3 pinned arches, not just a continuous arch like the St. Louis, but you would have a pin at the bottom, so the bottoms could move, and then there's a pin at the top. And so engineers at that time, because of this construction, they could figure out the forces in these, and then they could design it. And at the time, this span was the largest interior space at the time. And so this covered about 20 acres or about 15 football fields. And now we're kind of jump to 1890, where getting kind of warming up here for the competition of the 1892 to celebrate 400 years later of Columbus coming to America. So the official second city that revealed that Chicago had passed Philadelphia and Brooklyn to become the second largest city in the country. And like I say, we really thought we were going to be running, and maybe some of them felt that we were going to surpass New York at the time. So there was this big competition into who was going to host this fair. Washington, D.C. was in the running, St. Louis was in the running, New York was in the running to hold the fair. But I would say there are three things that the Chicago got the fair, is that its population did exceed 1 million. The construction of the auditorium building, which we'll talk about here shortly. And finally, and maybe most importantly, that it was able to outraise New York for funds to host the fair. And I think this to me is just amazing. We talk about how I think some of us are aware, just Chicago was the fastest growing city. I think sometimes we say definitely in the United States, but it might be in the world during this time period. Just you can see how Chicago goes from 1860 from about 100,000, as we said, in 1890 to 1 million, and then in 1900 almost 1.7 million. And it is approaching Manhattan there, but if we all know our history, then New York kind of gets wind of this, and they kind of do the same thing where they bring in the boroughs, and they kind of bring in 5 boroughs and make New York City. So just not letting Chicago pass them. And so then on the map to the right there is just kind of how Chicago did that, how they just kept annexing some of the villages and some of the townships that were around it to incorporate those, and finally get enough people to claim that it was a million people. As I mentioned, one of the things I speculated that we got the Columbian Exposition was the auditorium building. The auditorium building was built in 1889, and it's still there on, it's called Congress and Michigan Avenue. And at the time, it was the tallest building and the most expensive in the United States. It was the tallest in Chicago, and it was a multi-use. It was an office building, it was a hotel, and it also had a theater for the opera company. And basically, it was the home for the Chicago Grand Opera Company. And really, the intent of that was to really put Chicago on the cultural map, that we're just not this wild, wild west frontier, and that we do have some culture out here in the Wild West. So, and now we're starting to plan for the fair. And here, one of the people very much involved in the fair is Frederick Law Olmsted. He's in his 70s now about this time, and he's doing the Biltmore Estate. He's still working in New York. So he's taking the trains all over to all these sites, working on these things. And before this, he had prepared a plan for Jackson Park. So here we have his plan for Jackson Park with some of the buildings laid out on the fair. And again, there was this great debate on where they were going to host it. Some people thought it should have been right downtown. Some people thought it should have been west of downtown. But ultimately, they chose this site at Jackson Park for the site. So you can see there's this lagoon, and this is going to be a major undertaking to reshape this land to host the fair. And here is a picture of the grounds. And in 1890, he gets all the movers and shakers together of the architects that are going to help him design all these buildings. Excuse me, and kind of to the consternation of all the architects here, most of them were from the East Coast. And he takes them to this site here where the fair is going to be in carriages in January of 1891. And it's a cold, blistery day, overcast for the architects. And they look at this desolate site. And one of them says to Daniel Burnham, "Do you mean to say that you really expect to open a fair here by 93? And Burnham replies, quote, "That point is settled." So in about a 2.5 years, they're going to go from this to a fairgrounds that's going to be able to host 200,000 people a day. So to do this, he literally has to come up with I would say, a construction trailer. So this is Daniel Burnham's construction trailer, if you will, or his supervision headquarters, or the shack, complete with a wine cellar. And at the time, he had moved from the city of Chicago up to Evanston. So a lot of the times he would just stay here instead of commuting, if you will, from Jackson Park to Evanston. And during this construction time, he would also host concerts and review sessions in the shack. So some people had it pretty good. But then others, at the peak of construction, there were as many as 16,000 workers, as many as 25 to 40,000 workers during the construction of the fair and the fair. So this was a huge employment thing going on for the city of Chicago. Many of the construction workers were tramps or itinerant workers. And like I say, it was one of the largest employers in the Chicago area, but behind the trains. And also during, the construction went on during the winter of 1892 to 1893, because they still had to get plans going. And so much of the construction was during the winter, and the workers complained that they were being compelled to stand in water for weeks and generally exposed. And I've seen some spreadsheets. The grading and fill work cost $440,000. Get this, I converted it to today's dollars. $12 million for this 6-month fair was spent on just grading and filling. And at the time, the construction site was surrounded by an 8-foot high fence, barbed wire, basically for preventing labor issues, because the Pilsen issue is going on. And so there was actually a lot of strikes going on. And there was actually a standalone police force for manning the gates to the construction site. So it had its own police force even before. If any of you have read The Devil in the White City, in addition to the hand power or the tramp work, there was these, in The Devil in the White City, these were called floating barns. And I found out that these things were made by the Bickerus company, steam-powered dredges, because the dredging cost to move or open up these lagoons cost about $500,000, or again, about $13 million were spent on dredging. So in addition to dredging, he realized that he had to raise this land up above the lake. So he brought in vast amounts of manure from the stockyards, and about 200,000 yards of dirt were brought in by railroads. And to me, I don't think it's not a coincidence that some of the main money behind this were the owners of the Union Stockyard. So I wonder where that manure came from. So even during construction, about 10,000 visitors a day visited the site. And originally it was free, but then they realized they were missing an opportunity. So they started charging initially 25 cents, and that was raised to 50 cents with all these people coming just to watch the construction. Now we get into one of the, to me, a very interesting, I would say, engineering aspect of it. And looking at the time in 1890, the life expectancy in the United States was 44 years. And a child mortality rate to 5 years was about 280 per 1,000 births. Or I would say a kid had a 1 in 3 and 4 chance of making it to the age of 5. Right now, the life expectancy is to 79 years, and that child mortality rate is 7 out of 1,000, or that is reduced by 40 times, not 40%, but 40 times. So at this time, to me, one of the main issues was the issue of getting drinking water. We were getting our drinking water from Lake Michigan, and then that was also where the Chicago River was flowing, which had our wastewater. So one of the big issues was that Chicago was known as the typhoid fever uh, death rate in the country, and where there was about 90 out of about 100,000 people, and it peaked at about 170 per thousand in 1891. So this was a huge concern of a basic publicity issue of people coming to the fair and people getting sick and dying from typhoid fever and cholera. So there, what are the engineers going to do? And there's a couple of famous engineers expressed this concern in an engineering news journal. So what are the planners going to do? So what are you going to do? You get a fresh water supply for this temporary city. And where do you do that? You go to Waukegan, Wisconsin. And at the time, Waukegan, Wisconsin it was known as a spa, and it had developed over time as a medicinal spa for if you were not feeling well. So so they hire a guy, or he takes the contract that he's going to deliver water from Waukegan, Wisconsin, down to the south side of Chicago. It's about 100 miles. And he shows up there with workers on a train with his pockets filled of money. And the city of Waukegan realizes he's coming, and they basically arrest him and throw him in jail because they're afraid that, if they take all this water away, the spring will dry up. But ultimately, he finds another site outside of the city of Waukegan and is able to build the water system that delivers this spring water from Waukesha, Wisconsin, down to the Columbian Exposition. So there it actually is cooled at the fair, and then it's distributed at dispenser machines, or you can get bottles or you can get a free drinking cup. So here's one of those drinking fountains. And like I say, this Waukesha water was talked about how it would cure a lot of ailments. And to me, it's interesting to note that not a single case of typhoid was linked to the fair. So this was a successful solution to the issue of bringing good drinking water to the fair. Excuse me. Another issue then, so if everybody's drinking water and then you're having fairgoers, then is what are you going to do with all this wastewater? And to me, it's amazing, again, this temporary city, that they had sanitation facilities for 30,000 workers and 200,000 visitors a day. So like I say, they had a treatment facility that would handle about 10 gallons per person today, which is much less than what we use today. And they had 70 miles of sewer plumbing installed. And the sewage system treated 6 million gallons a day, similar to a city of 600,000. The sewage was chemically treated and incinerated on site, and then the clear water was then piped into Lake Michigan. And there was a whole paper presented on this, and there were actually tours given of the sanitary facility. So I would say this is like wastewater treatment as for the civil engineers doing the birth of it. Now, kind of on the dark side of all this engineering, you can see again, just to get a scale, there's a man sitting right on the left edge of that photograph, right on the top of the building there. So for this fair, there were 400 buildings erected, 500,000 square feet of paving and bricks, or paving bricks, and 415 miles of wiring. And to accomplish this in all a short time, as I assume you can assume, worker safety was not a high thing, as laborers were cheap. So in the first year, there were 18 fatalities, and with 50 workers dying during the duration of the construction of the fair. So that's a short period of time. With I think you would have something like that today, that would be shut down much earlier than that. And also, just as I mentioned with the labor unrest, that there were at the time there were at least 24 strikes with 4,000 workers honoring the picket lines organized by the carpenters. One other interesting thing I found that Elias Disney, father of Walt Disney, worked at the fair as a carpenter. So you build all these buildings, and they have this, and it wants to be a white city in the classical form, which we'll see here shortly. And they realize that to paint all these buildings, a bucket and brush just isn't going to cut it. So to me, this is one of the first use of spray paint as we now use it. So all the buildings were spray painted white, and so they could accomplish it in time. And what they were spraying on, it was almost like a plaster of Paris, but it's called staff, and it was invented in France, and it's kind of a plaster of Paris with hemp fibers in it. And but one thing with this, all the buildings were covered with this, and it's not very durable. So you had to really have a good paint on it to protect it from the weather. And also one note, this staff is very flammable. Dang it. Okay. Another thing, to me, it's amazing. There was a 2,000-foot long moving walkway there. So this walkway was extended out into Lake Michigan for the steamers that would come from downtown for them to dock. And then you could either walk along this moving walkway or you could sit. And it went at 3 miles an hour and 6 miles an hour. And this is, I could say, 9 years before the moving walkway in Terminal 1 was built. So to me, it wasn't quite done at the time, but to me, it's also just an amazing feature of the Columbian Exposition. And one thing I don't think we realize is that also in the city, the city at the time had horrible air quality because we were burning a lot of coal in the city to power steam and in power boilers and elevators. And you can see a steamer here, but actually in the World's Fair, no coal was burnt. It was fuel oil, so that none of this soot would get onto the white building. So another reason why it was called the White City. Just a quick note there, you can see the pier there sticking out to the bottom right there. And to me, it's also interesting. So the first thing you come into when you come into it there is a casino. It's funny how sometimes things don't change that. So also another pretty amazing, interesting thing is there was an intramural train that you could ride from one end of the fair to the other. But the really interesting thing about this train is it had an electrified third rail. Prior to that, they have sometimes, if we see in other cities, where you have the wires above it, or you would have a streetcar that grabs a cable underneath it. But so this is really kind of what we know as the CTA really was developed here in 1893. And originally this was free, but they didn't have fairgoers. So you could ride it from one end to the other, and some people just rode this all the time. So they finally had to get conductors on to actually get people off because it was such a good deal, and people that had come, from the countryside were just in amazement, and this was worth its weight in gold of just riding this back and forth. And so here, to me, it's an excellent. You can see the manufacturers and liberal arts building, just the size of it compared to the other ones. And I guess up to the very top is the art gallery, and that now is where the museum, that is one of the two buildings that were permanent, and that is the Museum of Science and Industry there, where the art gallery that was converted. And here is another, just to give you another view, it looks just like the CTA track with just a view of the fair with restaurants and just all these exhibits. In this case, we're in the livestock area. So I assume we're at the south end here where the agriculture and machinery are, and at the south pond. But I don't think, like I say, I don't know if this was actually who took this shot, because I don't see a lot of people there. But to me, it's a great shot of just the kind of the rail and the fair. Another thing that I think is interesting, again, it was called the White City because a lot of the buildings were built almost looking like Greek or Roman temples, I would say, with very classical style architecture, and looking like Greek or Roman temples. But there was one kind of outlier, and this was the transportation building by Louis Sullivan. And this is a rendering of that. I don't think there's a debate on what the actual colors were. But all of the other buildings were white, and Louis Sullivan just did not want to go along with the motif, I would say, of all the other buildings. So he really just kind of sticks to his gun and comes up with what he thinks is what architecture should be doing. And he is quoted to something to the extent that this whole Columbian Fair set back architecture 50 years or a generation, if not more. But one of the things in getting ready for this, I'm just talking about engineering and accepting world things, that in this transportation building, there were carriages, trains, model ships, and stuff kind of backward looking for transportation. And I've found that kind of tucked away in a corner were two horseless carriages, a gas engine Daimler quadricycle, Daimler being the predecessor to Mercedes-Benz, or the first gasoline-powered automobile on public display in the United States. And to me, this blew away when I found this, an electric powered quadricycle, if you will, from Des Moines, Iowa. So again, just funny how somebody were just a little too much ahead of their time. And it was also neither merited a mention in the whole program for the fair. Another big thing was the competition between AC and DC. Electricity is just coming on like gangbusters here. But there's this huge debate between which way are we going to go? Are we going to go with alternating current, or are we going to go with direct current? Tesla and Westinghouse are the advocates for AC current, and Edison is the promoter of DC current. But it's also interesting that Edison had the patent on his light bulb that really was the light bulb to have. So Westinghouse, with their AC current, got the contract to electrify and light the fair. So somehow they had to figure out how to get around the patent of Edison. And so what they did is they came up with a stopper bulb that it was not the filament was not in a vacuum and not sealed, but this made it be that they just they burned out much faster. So there was a huge army of men going around and replacing these light bulbs because it was a workaround of trying to avoid a patent or a copyright infringement on Edison's light bulb. So to me, then back to being an engineer, and before calculators. This is a diagram of a three-hinged arch, and to me, it's amazing. Without calculators, they would solve it graphically. So on the left side is the truss design, and in the middle there, it's a stress diagram. So they're solving how big these members need to be graphically. And to me, I think maybe we've lost something by just going to calculators, where if with graphically we can maybe see better solutions, or maybe where we can improve on that situation. And then the actual truss design, you can see at the very bottom, it says there's an 8-inch pin, and then at the top there's a 5-inch pin, and at the clearance is about 200 feet to the very top. And so this is only half. You can see, so it's 181, so it's 300 and about 360 feet wide. And this is the basic building block then of the manufacturing building. So here it again, we always kind of we assume there's cranes, but you can see that just to build this, we don't have cranes. So they're assembling the truss. But to me, it's a fascinating endeavor of building these trusses without a crane, and just kind of building false work, almost like you have to do for a stone arch, where you build false and support it until you can get all the way to the top. This building used 6,000 tons of steel, 1,000 tons of iron, and 17 million board feet of lumber. And again, it's just for a temporary structure for 6 months. And here's an amazing shot going back to the labor worker safety. Here, these guys are at the very top, more than 200 feet in the air, about up equivalent to about a 20-story building, trying to put that pin in the very top of those where those two arches come together. And you can see then the horticultural building in the background. I'd say a more classical looking building. And then kind of some of the other, the building at the bottom there on the ground. And here we are assembling, and again, you can see there's two men there. One man, he's very faint, kind of to the right of the bottom of that arch, where that 8-inch pin, you can see that thing could move, but just the size of this space, I just think, to me, it just blows me away. To me, it just would have had to been a fascinating space to be in. But then there's also, that so you're designing this, and it's temporary, and so you want to build it as light as possible. And so a storm hit on June 13th, 1892, and it knocked half the building down. And then they were looking at the design criteria, and they were not designed for wind loads. Also, they were not designed for snow load, but yet they were being built in the winter because it was going to open up that spring, May of 1893. So the previous engineer is fired, and Mr. Shanklin is hired. And he is also then goes on to be the builder of the municipal pier, or otherwise now as we know it, Navy Pier. So here is it done with the exterior view of the building. As I said, it's about 1,700 feet long by just under 800 feet wide, and just over 200 feet high. And I, a temporary building. Anybody want to guess? Supposedly it was $1.7 million at the time, or and when I converted it, $45 million for this one building. And I said there was 200 buildings, but you can see how the fair and the landscaping. Some people say it was Frederick Law Olmsted's landscaping that probably was one of the bigger features of all of this. And again, here's an interior shot of the building where it supposedly could hold about 300,000 people for an event. To me, and I don't know, just the roar there to me would be amazing. And just to drive this point home, I put the Willis Tower, excuse me, it's spelled Willis, but I think it's pronounced Sears Tower. So this is, I think, pretty close to scale, that just to get a sense how big this building is, that is the Sears Tower laying on its side. And if you could scrape off the corners at the base, it would fit inside of there with room to spare. It wouldn't even go all the way to the other side. So it's just an amazing building at the time. So now on to one other thing. So here, as I mentioned, this was the tallest building in 1889, the Eiffel Tower. But so here, this is just coming on the heels of the French fair. So what are we as Americans going to do? And as Daniel Burnham, we have to figure out how to out Eiffel. So the Eiffel Tower was 6,000, 1,000, about 1,000 feet tall and about 400 feet wide. And at the time, it was the tallest structure in the world, and it beats out the Washington Monument. So, as I said, we have to out Eiffel, or as he put to the planning committee, something novel, original, daring, and unique, or as I said, to out Eiffel. And here's Daniel Burnham and his partner, Root, who actually, it's sad to say, dies of pneumonia. I think it was January 1891, right when they're really just starting to get into the planning of that. And some of the proposals were to cover the whole fair with a 3,000-foot diameter tent. Some people said build a 1,000-foot high tower. But a steel inspector for the fair, George Washington Ferris, sketches a large wheel, but with like spokes in a bike wheel with tension rods. But Burnham says it looks too fragile and dismisses it. And they basically run out of options. And on December 16th, 1892, they got nothing else. So they said, hey, Mr. Ferris, you got to build that. And then you've been selected. But he's only got 6 months to design, fabricate, and build it on the site. So it's amazing. This is their office. This is on the top floor of the Rookery building, right there on the South Street. And we give tours of the building, and they found the fireplace. So there's me sitting at the fireplace of Burnham and Root at their office there. Because when these buildings were built, the top floors were least desirable. And so because of elevators and heating and air, so the designers usually had the top floor. So here we are. The wheel of this Ferris wheel had to be lifted of 140 feet in the air, and we don't have cranes. So can you imagine? You can see some of the block and tackles there right in the front there of what they had to come up with to lift this 90,000-pound axle. And at the time, it was the largest piece of storage steel forged at the time. It was forged in Pittsburgh, and then it was brought here to, I can't imagine, just the train and just to get it there to land to the site had to be a major undertaking. And I also love this picture. This picture reminds me of, I think a lot of us remember seeing the steel workers in New York. They're eating their lunch sitting on a beam high above New York City. Well, here are the workers. They're actually reassembling the Ferris wheel up by Lincoln Park at the end of the fair, and where it resides for a while. But here they're standing on the axle about 140 feet in the air. To me, just an incredible, just worker safety there, at an amazing thing. Oh, I guess, yeah, what I'm thinking of, it's called Lunch Atop a Skyscraper, and where there are 11 steel workers there. They were, so I think this one is very similar to that, if in many ways not better. And I love these pictures then of assembling. This is still how they do it, and how they figure this out. That you basically put this together spoke by spoke, and just kind of keep pushing it around. And again, just the scaffolding, because we don't have cranes at the time. And it was designed and constructed by George Washington Ferris, and it had more than 10,000 parts. And would you want to be the first one to write it, making sure that all those 10,000 parts were there? So it took 5 months for him to design, fabricate, and assemble. And it was also then adorned with 3,000 lights. And here's to me an overall picture. And this was on the midway that kind of extended inland from the fairground. And you can see here is one of the cabs, larger than a Pullman Palace, and each one of those could carry 60 people. And with 36 cars, it could hold up to 2,160 people. To me, an amazing ride. And here is, I'm sure, can you imagine people just from anywhere this is the view you would see from the top of the Ferris wheel. And a reporter, Robert Graves, said, "It is indescribable sensation, that revolving through such a vast orbit in a bird cage." So over the 19-week run, because he didn't get it started run right away, 1.4 million people paid 50 cents to take the two. You only went around twice, but it took 20 minutes to do that. It was a moneymaker for the fair, but actually George Washington Ferris ended up with a bunch of lawsuits, and he did not do well with it. And kind of a sad, this was just on the news recently, that there was a St. Louis had a fair in 1904 to celebrate, again, a year late, the Louisiana Purchase. So the Ferris wheel was moved there, and at the end, it was no one wanted to move it to the Coney Island, but it was too expensive to move it. So they decided to blow it up with 100 pounds of dynamite and sell it for scrap. So me, it's just a kind of a sad ending for, to me, just an amazing engineering marvel. So here I tried to kind of summarize some of the not so well-known engineering achievements at this World's Fair. A couple of other things I didn't mention is to me, going backwards here, that there were, I don't know if you saw some of the photographs, there were no buried no power poles. All the electricity was buried. Stormwater was separate from wastewater, and we don't adopt that until late in our time. And to me, just some amazing things of the Ferris wheel, world's largest building, and AC kind of taking over DC. To me, just kind of an amazing thing. And to me, also, as someone said, with Frederick Law Olmsted, just kind of massively reshaping the landscape there. And so I didn't want to end on this note. And so this Columbian Exposition kind of takes city planning to the next level. And I think ultimately clearly leads to the 1909 Plan of Chicago, which kind of adopts a very classical motif, if you will, for the buildings. And this is a rendering of the Civic Center Plaza, where he felt City Hall should be. And this is actually located at the kind of the Spaghetti Bowl there just west of the downtown. And here's another bird's view. And also, to me, it's very interesting that they kind of unionized the train station. There was, I think, at most 5 or 6 railway stations kind of scattered coming in from different directions. And he proposes in this 1909 plan to unify those and kind of switch the grades up so that they don't interfere with the roads. And so to me, it's a very interesting rendering there. And the last one I have is a rendering looking towards Wolf Point, or we're on the South Branch looking north, and Lake Michigan is off on our right here. So that to me is just an amazing shot. And you can see again kind of his thinking of upper and lower Wacker Drive there, separating all the service trucks and cars from the everyday vehicular traffic. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. Now would be a good time. There's nothing in the chat right now as far as questions, but if anyone has a question, go ahead and type it in.
Oh, I answered them all, I guess.
Apparently. Let's see if anything pops up.
I guess if.
Oh, here we go. We got a couple.
All right.
Oh, couple of comments. Thank you for pronouncing Willis correctly. Great.
I just want to add, that is a quote by Lee, I think his name is Lee Bay. He is the architecture critic for the Sun Times. I heard that from him about it's spelled Willis, but it's pronounced Sears. I think it's just hilarious. So you kind of satisfy both people.
Great presentation. Thanks. Can you recommend books to get more details?
I guess to me, if you start digging, you realize it depends on what you want to learn. I mean, you can read like the landscape architecture, read about Frederick Law Olmsted. There's whole books on the electricity. A good book, I would say, if you just skip the chapters on the devil, is The Devil in the White City. Is a very interesting, actually pretty a good detailing of just the activity. Go see your librarian and ask them to give you some recommendations. Once you start looking, it's amazing what you can find out there about the Columbian Exposition.
How
much
much?
did it cost?
Yeah, so you see the questions?
I
Kevin?
don't,
Okay.
I have found different answers for that. I don't feel comfortable giving an answer, but ultimately in the end, it did make money, they claim. So I guess that's the important part. And also,
Ooh, you just cut out.
yes.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, your volume just cut out for a second.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, Wild Bill made money on it because he was not allowed to be a part of the fair, but he sets up right next to it, and he does quite well with all the attendants. Oh, who was the mayor? I guess you could look that up. I don't know that off the top of my head. I think he. Now I should know that because I think he was assassinated at the closing of the fair. I mean, there's just all these things that happen. Sorry, you Google that. I don't know that off the top of my head. Again, there's someone, do any buildings remain from the exposition? As I noted, there was one, the science and industry building was the fine arts.
Oh, right.
I can put that back there just because I think, and the other remaining building, it was used for congresses, but is the Art Institute. So that building remained as well. So those are the only two remaining buildings. Was Frank Lloyd Wright involved? To my knowledge, no, I don't think he was involved. He, at this point, he might be in Europe with one of his clients' wives at this time. He was working for Adler and Sullivan there in the auditorium building, and he gets fired for moonlighting. And so I know I have not found anything that says he was involved with the fair. Good question, though.
That was a good question. I think that's it.
Yeah.
A good amount of questions and comments. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We ended up with almost everyone in attendance. We had about 22 online tonight, so that's
All
not
right.
well. We had 27 registered, so we will go ahead and post this on our channel. I'll put it up tomorrow. Kevin, thank you so much. I know you have a few other presentations as well. So yeah, hopefully we can have you come back and present again next time in person. I know you prefer to do this in person than over Zoom, but
Yes.
I appreciate you taking the time tonight to be with us. So, all right, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, and the ELA Library for having me. Thank you.
All right, good night,
There's a
everyone.
raised hand. Can we let them?
Oh, I'm not. Let's see. Who is raising their hand?
Who raised their hand?
Maybe that was an accident. Oh, it was an accident. It looks like it was.
Oh, okay.
Looks like it was me. Must have hit that. I'm gonna lower my hand now. I don't
All
know.
right.
Let's see. Anyway, all right.
All
Good
right.
night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
All right. Bye.